Chain of Command, Part 1. The Cardassians are back and shake up everything, including the crew of the Enterprise.
The Enterprise is hanging out with another ship near the Cardassian border, and Vice Admiral Nechayev comes aboard to meet with Picard.
And she immediately tells him he's relieved of duty. It's a pretty intense opening.
Yeah, it's about time Starfleet did something about his constant violating of the Prime Directive. They have a big meeting where Nechayev says the Cardassians appear to be preparing to invade a disputed border system, hoping the Federation won't be willing to declare war over it.
And she wants to have a face-to-face meeting with the Cardassians to negotiate, /intimidate, /figure out what they're up to.
Throughout the discussion, she is cartoonishly dismissive of Riker and has a very arrogant smirk on her face, telling us that we are supposed to dislike her.
Even though there's no real reason.
It's the typical subtlety we've come to expect from TNG. She says that Picard, Beverly, and Worf have been reassigned, but won't say where.
And Picard is being replaced by Captain Jellicoe,
who negotiated the previous armistice with the Cardassians.
And that's why he's being given the Enterprise and not Riker, much to his chagrin.
We cut to Picard directing Beverly and Worf in a simulated mission in dangerous Cardassian tunnels.
And it turns out that even Worf and Beverly are in the dark concerning the particulars of their mission. And it's dark in the cave.
Jellicoe beams aboard the Enterprise, and he turns out to be played by Ronnie Cox.
And just so you know, I was going through and finding a bunch of Total Recall quotes that I could hopefully stick into this one and Part 2.
At first he seems happy to meet Riker, but then he immediately begins giving orders to change their shift rotations, and his attitude puts Riker off because he's not used to professionalism.
It reminded me of what Kern did in Sins of the Father, so I had a pretty good idea of how the crew would react.
Later they have a whole ceremony where Picard formally transfers command of the Enterprise to Jellicoe, which makes all the officers unhappy.
Because they don't know how long it will last, or why all of it's happening in the first place.
And they're afraid they'll actually have to do work this time. Afterward, Jellicoe tells Picard they'll launch a probe to try to get more recent information about the location Picard's team is being sent to.
Because he wants to know what the is going on down there. Alright, let me check that one off.
And he tells Riker which shift should do it, but Riker says they're having trouble switching to the new shift schedule. Jellicoe refuses to listen to Riker's excuses.
And he tells him to just make it happen. On the way to the Cardassian meeting, Jellicoe's giving a bunch of orders to basically reconfigure the entire ship, despite Data telling him it doesn't make sense. But Jellicoe tells Data not to think. He doesn't give him enough information to think. He does what he's told. That's what he does.
And he orders Riker to run battle simulations, which just annoys him more.
He then goes down to engineering and tells a beardless Geordi to improve efficiency by 15%. Geordi is incredulous, despite him doing that himself regularly, but Data tells him they can do it.
And I've said this before, but if they know they can do that, why haven't they done it already? Why hasn't Data suggested that if he knows it's possible?
Maybe they can't remember jack shit.
Geordi says it'll take 2 days of straight work to get it done, and he isn't happy about it, but he'll still do it.
And Jellicoe says great, because otherwise he'll erase his ass.
Troy visits Jellicoe in what is now his ready room to talk about how the change of command is difficult for the crew to adjust to.
And they're uncertain how to react.
I see your point.
She says they could use some time to get to know him, but he says he doesn't have time for that, and assigns her to take care of it.
And as she is leaving, he tells her to wear a more appropriate uniform while on duty.
I prefer a certain formality on the bridge.
Geordi's bitching to Riker at having to do everything Jellicoe wants them to do, and asks him to talk to Picard about it.
Who is resting in his quarters after some strenuous training. When Riker sees the state that he's in, he decides not to bother him about it yet.
Later, Picard tells Jellicoe they'll be maintaining radio silence, and Jellicoe continues to express disdain for Riker,
telling him that Riker isn't as great as Picard seems to think.
He also says he probably won't be coming back from his mission, and finally turns his dickishness directly towards Picard.
But the Enterprise is mine now.
And he sends Picard off with his pretentious Shakespeare tome. When Picard, Beverly, and Worf go out on a shuttle, Picard finally tells them what's going on.
He says Starfleet thinks the Cardassians are engineering metagenic weapons.
And Beverly explains to Worf that metagenics are genetically engineered viruses that destroy all DNA they encounter. And Picard says the virus dissipates after a few days, leaving all the technology behind for whoever wants it. Worf says it sounds like that would be as dangerous to the attacker as to the victim, which is true of pretty much any weapon, especially biological or chemical weapons. And Picard says the Cardassians are developing a new delivery system where they can send the virus on a subspace wave and trigger it later.
Wait, he said send the virus via wave? I thought it was send a signal to trigger it via wave.
Throughout the scene, they talk about it in different ways. Sometimes they talk about it as if the Cardassians are still developing this kind of stuff, and sometimes they talk about it as if they're already using it. The whole scene doesn't really make sense, the way they talk about it.
But in the end, the only thing they're worried about is that one day, if the Cardassians win, it all might end. They're headed to try and find a secret research lab to determine if the Cardassians are actually building this weapon.
And he says he knows of a way to get there discreetly, so they go to Mos Eisley, where they meet with a Ferengi.
Picard says he's looking for a specific Ferengi to transport them, and it eventually gets ridiculous, where Beverly starts stroking his ego and his ears.
Right out in front of everyone. I'm surprised they put that on just regular broadcast TV back in the day.
It was a weird bit of humor in an otherwise humorless episode.
And I thought it was pretty stupid to have the captain of the flagship of Starfleet be the one to personally arrange secret transportation from someone who isn't already part of Starfleet.
We cut immediately to the three in the caves, searching for the secret lab, where Beverly is practically shouting for some reason.
I'm picking up some subspace signals.
Such good covert work.
And there was a funny bit with Beverly teasing Worf about being afraid of some space bats. I guess there was more humor in this episode then, there was that.
Yeah, but at least she wasn't stroking his ridges or whatever. Meanwhile, the Enterprise is rendezvoused with the Cardassian ship for negotiations, but Jellicoe unexpectedly goes to his ready room instead of the conference room.
And Troy goes to visit him to figure out what's going on.
And he tells her they've got a tricky situation here, and asks if she thinks she can play along.
He says he's establishing dominance by making the representative wait, which Troy points out is dangerous.
And as for the Cardassian, we don't even know what he looks like.
Down on the planet, the team comes to a cliff that they need to rappel down, and Worf teases Beverly about being afraid of heights.
Jellicoe finally makes his way to the meeting room with Gul Lamech and starts working his mind games and eventually storms out in anger. And Jellicoe tells Lamech he's nothing, he's nobody, he's a stupid dream, and all dreams come to an end.
Saying he'll wait to talk to a more serious negotiator. But when they get to the bridge, he reveals to Troy and Riker that he was just acting. He tells them to pretend they managed to talk him down, and to reluctantly allow the Cardassians to send aids for Lamech.
Back in the cave, the team has made it to the bottom of the pit, and Picard detects a chamber beyond a wall, and Worf makes a tunnel for them to crawl through with his phaser.
Which seemed kinda dangerous, but okay.
He's chief of security, he knows what he's doing.
I wouldn't be crawling through that hole after he just burned a freaking rock open.
What, you think it's gonna cave in and almost trap them? Later, there's a cave-in that almost traps Beverly.
Up on the Enterprise, Jellicoe reconvenes with Gul Lamech and his aides.
He tells them the Cardassians have been massing troops and the Federation won't stand for it.
But Gul Lamech says the Federation is infringing on their space along the border.
Jellicoe says it's ridiculous to think they're going to give away planets just because a bunch of lazy Cardassians think they own it.
Gul Lamech says he has information about a secret Federation group sent secretly into Cardassian territory, and he asks about Picard's secret whereabouts.
Reassigned.
Well, I hope his new assignment is not too dangerous.
Back in the cave, the team works their way through the tunnel when a cave-in almost crushes Beverly, and Worf is surprised that his phaser tunnel wasn't perfect. Perfect my ass.
But they managed to get Beverly out with seemingly no injuries, which I thought seemed unlikely.
I would have said, f*** 'em. Be a good lesson to the others.
And they come to what Picard says is a maintenance hatch with proximity sensors.
And he tells them to, don't touch that! Get away! Get back! They manage to bust through the door, and it turns out there's no lab at all, and they've been duped.
Some Cardassians pop out, and there's a shootout.
The team tries to retreat, but only Worf and Beverly escape back through the door, and they're forced to leave Picard behind.
Riker tells Jellicoe that they are picking up coded Cardassian messages from the planet, and he also says there were subspace waves coming from the planet that have now stopped.
And he tells him someone you trust wants to talk to you.
Jellicoe talks to Nechayev in his ready room and says the away team must have accomplished their mission since the subspace waves have stopped.
Picard is taken to a sweet-looking room to be interrogated by David Warner, which made this room even cooler.
And David Warner shows off how much he knows about Picard and his background, including his knowledge of subspace waves, revealing that the whole scheme about metagenics was a ruse to lure him in.
The guy with the suitcase, the mask, the money, the message, all of that was set up by the Cardassians. He says he's going to question Picard, and if he's not satisfied with his answers, he will die. Chain of Command, Part 1. Overall?
I was glad we were finally getting back to the Cardassians. Seems like it's been forever since we even heard about them. And of course, I was happy to see Ronnie Cox and David Warner, even if David Warner was only in it a little bit. I'm definitely more interested in seeing Part 2. The idea behind the metagenic weapons I thought was interesting, but the way they talked about it didn't make any sense. And they spent a long time talking about it. They should have figured that scene out a little bit more. And I wonder, even though the whole thing was a ruse, if they are really developing a metagenic weapon of some kind. I liked Captain Jellicoe's interactions with the rest of the crew, even if they tried a little too hard to make us not like him. I wondered if he was secretly working with the Cardassians the whole time, or maybe he was a Romulan spy or something. The way Starfleet is handling things here didn't make much sense to me, but of course we don't really know everything that's going on, unless we're supposed to at this point. I guess I don't know.
Who gives a shit what you believe?
We'll see what happens with Part 2. Given that it's a two-parter, it's kind of hard to gauge some of this stuff because I don't know what it's leading to. But I thought there were too many things in this episode that didn't make sense. The way the rest of the crew reacted to Jellicoe's orders, and his whole attitude of everything. If it turns out that there's nothing behind that he's just being kind of a controlling dick, then it's not going to make a lot of sense. I didn't love this episode. I didn't think it was terrible or anything, but I am more interested in seeing what happens in Part 2.
So you're saying how you feel about this one is going to be dependent on how the second part turns out?
For certain elements, yes, but there were definitely things in this episode that I thought were not great, especially all the scenes of Picard and his team going through tunnels and nothing really happening, just to kind of drag it out. If they know where this base is, couldn't they get them a little closer than wherever the hell they were, where they need to burn through rocks to get where they're trying to get to, and go down cliffs and everything?
Frankly, I'm amazed it worked.
There were just too many things in this episode that didn't make sense. Not a whole lot actually happened. I gave it a C.
That's much lower than what I gave it.
I'm not surprised.
No wonder you kept out of sight. Well, I also think when most people are thinking of this one, they're thinking of both parts. And I will say the second part is much better than this one.
Yeah, I figured it probably would be.
I gave this one a B+. This was the most engaging episode we've had so far this season, and the one that felt like it had the most substance. I am looking forward to Part 2, especially now that I know David Warner is in it. Jellicoe's command style was clearly different. The fact they treated him as almost an antagonist was kind of dumb, but it did make me want to see how other ships are operated. We really only see the Enterprise's day-to-day. I would be interested to see how other captains handle their ships. I'm glad we were given a reason why Picard, Worf, and Beverly were chosen for this mission. We've seen crew members selected for missions for purely dramatic reasons in the past, and it was nice that this was a little more thought out. And I'm glad the whole situation was taken seriously. We've seen many episodes where something very serious and dangerous is going to happen or is happening, and everyone kind of just shrugs it off, because they know by the end of the episode it'll all be okay. Although it did make the small bits of humor stand out even more. I could have done without them.
So I was looking back at the episodes, and I feel like Schisms was better. I feel like True Q was way better, way more interesting. Even
If you say Rascals, I'm gonna quit doing all of this right now. And as a side note, I thought the guy playing Gul Amek did an awesome job. He's pretty much what I imagine when I think of Cardassians being Cardassians. I suppose we should probably end this, because in 30 seconds you'll be dead. Then I'll blow this place up and be home in time for cornflakes.